Good day to you. I'd like to, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to share some of my thoughts about the state of the world as part of your conference. Let me also congratulate you on holding the conference and wish you the best of wishes for a highly successful event. And more importantly, for many of the ideas that come out of the event, to have a lasting influence both in China and around the rest of the world, so we can all become better people and a better society. So again, congratulations. In thinking about what I may say, in preparing for this speech, I remember discussing with some of the organizers that I had no particularly expertise in aspects of modern technologies and digital payments and such matters. And therefore, why did you want me to speak? And the organizers very kindly said, talking a little about the state of the world and the circumstances of this topic would be something that they thought I may have some insights to share. So that is what I shall do in the next few minutes. Of course, we are living in a truly extraordinary time. It is typical of many international scholars to make that statement almost at any time that I recall in my life. And normally I smile when I hear such scholars saying these things, because it is always easy to say. And I'm usually quite skeptical of the use of that phrase. But at this particular moment in time, I have to say, I cannot think of more known unknowns about how the future may evolve than I ever have done in over 40 years of professional life. And that, of course, should be borne in mind, as well as the unknown unknowns, of which, of course, we have just experienced for now nearly 2 years, one of the hugest unknown unknowns that have had a dramatic influence on the world. And in this regard, of course, COVID-19 and the consequences both for our health and our economies continues to linger around many parts of the world. And one has to hope from this dreadful moving disease that we have all learnt smarter ways to deal, respond, and minimize the disruption to our lives. In that regard, of course, linked to the main theme of this conference, it has probably, if not definitely, accelerated the potential for technology, including all forms of digital payments. And that in itself is a reason why having expert discussion about the nature of technology and digital payments is so sensible with your organizers. And again, I congratulate you. If we could move on from COVID, but importantly, in the circumstances in which COVID has appeared, I find myself thinking in the spirit of what I've often said before, having been through a lot of international crises: never let a crisis go to waste. And in particular, the circumstances in which this crisis has taken place, which is a world that had, for the 12 years since the great financial crisis, been increasingly concerned about growing inequality within many countries around the world, whether that be China or Western democracies. And it's almost definitely the case that COVID-19 has highlighted and exaggerated many of these inequalities further. And in this regard, again, relating it to the topic of the conference and technology and digital payments, it is very important that whatever transpires in coming years, that we endeavor to make sure that the beneficiaries of these technologies include all parts of society and not just those that are the wealthiest. By coincidence, in the past 24 hours, I've just finished writing a brief article for a European newspaper about the relative performance of some stock markets around the world, and asked to focus in particular on the apparent poor performance of the UK market compared to that of the US market. And the single biggest reason why that difference has happened is purely due to 5 huge American technology companies that are increasingly important in many aspects of so many lives around the world. And my concluding comments, which is highly relevant for what I'm trying to say here today, is that whilst they are important for the privileged few that own stocks and shares, for people and normal human beings, and therefore for policymakers, they shouldn't overly worry about such narrow topics and focus on whether these technological companies are helping to genuinely boost productivity for our societies, and therefore with it, having lasting benefits for all of our people, including the circumstances in which they live, their wages, their earnings, their lifestyle, and their health. And these are things that I believe are another direct consequence of COVID-19. When you look at some of the countries that appear to have coped the best in terms of minimizing the loss of life and the disruption, it appears to be a combination of those that have used vaccines the most wisely, but also crucially, again, to the topic of this conference, those that have managed to allow the greatest technologies to be used by most of their own people in order for us to identify and isolate the reoccurring clusters of COVID-19 incidents. And that, again, is a brilliant illustration of the benefits of modern technology. One further thing I would like to specifically say in this regard before I finish with some comments about international policy cooperation is on the role of education. I come from a reasonably lower middle class, working class background in the north of England. And I am one of the lucky people to have emerged from my background to have a very, very good education. And so I know personally what the importance of such an education is to progress. And it is also evident before and through COVID-19 that in many societies around the world, and I suspect in China, that's probably partly the case with rural China, that some people can't get education offered to them as well as others. And again, here, technology can play an enormous role in allowing us to have different forms of educational teaching, an ability to reach out to people better than without it. And this should be thought of as an important part of life going forward, including for how one uses digital payments. So all of these things are obviously going to be topics your conference will discuss and no doubt have some very meaningful suggestions. But I want to finish by talking about the importance of international policy cooperation. Unfortunately, we seem to live in a rather fractured world with many countries seeing the world differently than others and unfortunately seemingly struggle to find the common ground in which we can all agree on. This is particularly disappointing for somebody like myself. Nearly 20 years ago, I created the famous BRIC acronym standing for the rise of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. I often joke that it's stamped on my forehead for the rest of my life. And one of the reasons I did that was to argue that we needed to bring these countries into a much bigger central role in global governance So even though we choose to have different ways we live our own societies, when it comes to international policy agreements, we have some common ground and some common rules that we can all share together. And whilst we've seen some unfortunate developments in some Western countries that have taken us away from existing organizations, I also think it's very important that China and the other BRICS countries think more constructively about using their own platforms as well as now their own role in things like the G20 in order to have much higher standards of international agreements. And this will be itself extremely relevant for the use of technology and digital payments going forward. So with all of that, let me stop and thank you again for being so generous and asking me to join the conference. I look forward at some point in the future to visiting China again. It seems like a long, long time since I've been. But in the meantime, congratulations again. And I look forward to reading what all the summary ideas are coming out of the event. Thank you very much.